The escape pod tumbled through space like a broken bird, its hull scarred by plasma burns and meteor strikes. When the salvage team from Research Station Epsilon 7 halted aboard, they expected to find another pile of scrap metal and maybe some salvageable components. Instead, they found her. She lay curled in the pod's emergency cradle, pale as starlight, her breathing so shallow it barely registered on the medical scanners. Her hair fell in waves of silver white around a face that seemed carved from moonstone, delicate yet somehow ancient, strange markings traced along her temples and the backs of her hands. Not tattoos, but something that seemed to shimmer just beneath her skin like veins of liquid mercury. "Never seen anything like her," muttered Thomas Eriksson, the station's medical officer, as he ran his scanner over her unconscious form. "Humanoid, but the bone density is all wrong. Brain activity is unusual, almost like she's dreaming, but the patterns don't match any known species." The woman, for she was clearly female, despite her alien features, remained unconscious for 3 days when she finally opened her eyes. They were the color of deep violet, endless and haunting. She looked around the medical bay with the slow, careful movements of someone emerging from a long nightmare. "Can you understand me?" Thomas asked gently, leaning forward with his hands visible and non-threatening. "Do you know where you are?" She stared at him for a long moment, her violet eyes tracking his movements with an intelligence that was clearly present, but somehow distant. Then she closed her eyes and turned her face away. Station Administrator Nia Reeves tried next, approaching, with a universal translator and a variety of linguistic protocols. The device cycled through dozens of known languages, from the clicking consonants of the Zephyrian traders to the tonal harmonics of the crystal singers. The woman listened to each attempt with the same patient silence, never responding, never giving any indication that she understood. "Maybe she's in shock," suggested Victor Chen, the station's xenobiologist. "Trauma can cause selective mutism in many species. Look at these readings. Her nervous system shows signs of severe stress." They tried everything: visual communication boards with symbols and pictures, mathematical sequences projected on the wall, even music, thinking perhaps her species communicated through sound. In ways they didn't understand, the woman watched, it all with those haunting violet eyes, but never responded. She ate when food was offered, accepted medical care without resistance, but remained locked in an impenetrable silence. The escape pod's data core had been corrupted, its memory banks fried by whatever catastrophe had sent her fleeing through space. The only clue to her origins came from fragments of stellar cartography that suggested she had traveled from the Nethys system, a region that long-range scans showed as nothing but debris fields and dead worlds. "The Nethri," whispered old Garrett Sullivan, the station's historian, when he saw the cartographic fragments. "I've heard stories. They were supposed to be telepaths, healers, but that was before the Dominion Wars, before the Scorching. The Scorching, even speaking the name sent chills through the research station. It had been a weapon of last resort, a psychic storm that had swept through entire star systems, burning out the minds of telepathic species. The Dominion had used it to break the resistance of the outer colonies, not caring that it would extinct entire civilizations in the process. If she's Nethri," Garrett continued, his voice heavy with sorrow, "she might be the last of her kind. And if she survived the Scorching, well, that would explain why she can't speak. The trauma of having your entire species' psychic network severed at once, it would be like having your soul torn out." They gave her quarters in the station's residential section, a small but comfortable room with a viewport that looked out onto the stars. She spent most of her time sitting by that window, staring out at the infinite darkness with an expression of such profound loss that it made the station crew uncomfortable to look at her. The researchers tried to study her abilities, hoping to find some way to help her communicate. They set up monitoring equipment and ran careful tests, but whatever telepathic powers she might have once possessed seemed completely dormant. The neural pathways that should have carried psychic energy showed only the faintest flickering, like the last embers of a dying fire. "She's not broken," Tomas insisted during one of their weekly meetings. "The scans show her mind is intact. She's just sealed off, like she's built walls around herself and thrown away the key. Days turned into weeks, and the woman, whom they had started calling Kira, after the Nethri word for wanderer that Garrett had found in the historical archives, remained as silent as ever. She walked the station's corridors during the day cycle, always alone, always moving with that same careful, deliberate pace. The crew had grown used to seeing her, a ghostly figure in the simple clothes they had provided, drifting through their lives like a beautiful, tragic shadow. Some of the younger crew members tried to befriend her, offering smiles and greetings. As they passed in the halls, Kira would acknowledge them with a slight nod, but never more than that. She seemed to exist in a world separate from theirs, close enough to touch but impossibly distant. It was during the third week of her stay that she first showed any sign of preference or choice. The station chef, a motherly woman named Rosa Martinez, had been leaving small treats outside Kira's quarters, fresh fruit from the hydroponics bay, warm bread from the automated bakery, small cups of herbal tea. Most went untouched, but one evening, Rosa found that the lavender tea had been consumed completely. She likes the lavender. Rosa announced to anyone who would listen, "I knew it. There's something about that tea. It's calming, helps with nightmares. My grandmother used to make it for me when I was little and couldn't sleep." From then on, Rosa made sure there was always a cup of lavender tea waiting outside Kira's door. Each evening, it was a small gesture, but it felt like progress, a tiny crack in the wall of silence that surrounded the mysterious woman. But it was also around this time that the dreams began. Several crew members reported strange, vivid dreams filled with images they couldn't quite remember upon waking, flashes of silver cities under purple skies, the sound of voices singing in harmonies that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the soul, and always, the overwhelming sensation of loss, as if something precious had been torn away and could never be recovered. "It's her," whispered some of the crew during their off-duty hours. "She's dreaming so hard that it's bleeding into our sleep." Whether or not this was true, the dreams continued, and slowly, something else began to change. The quality of silence around Kira seemed different, less empty, and more expectant, as if she were waiting for something, or someone, to find the right key to unlock the prison she had built around her heart. The station continued its routine, research, maintenance, the endless cycle of watches and duty shifts. But now there was something new in the air, a sense of anticipation that no one could quite explain. In the depths of space, on a research station at the edge of known civilization, the last of the Nethri waited in silence for someone to show her that she was not alone in the universe. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. But somewhere in the station's quiet corridors, a miracle was about to begin. Joran Thane had always preferred the quiet hours, while the rest of Epsilon 7's crew bustled through their day shifts, shattering in the corridors and filling the common areas with the comfortable noise of human companionship. Joran worked in the peaceful depths of the station's mechanical heart. The night shift suited him perfectly, just him, the gentle hum of the life support systems, and the satisfying rhythm of maintaining the technology that kept them all alive in the void. He was a man of average height with calloused hands and patient brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding. His dark hair was perpetually mussed from crawling through maintenance shafts, and he had a habit of humming old Earth songs while he worked, melodies his grandmother had taught him during childhood summers in the Appalachian Mountains. The other crew members knew him as reliable, competent, and refreshingly uncomplicated. What they didn't know was that Joran carried his own quiet wounds. He had come to Epsilon 7 3 years ago, fleeing memories of a failed relationship and a career in terraforming that had ended in disaster. The Kepler 442 project had been his masterpiece, a dead world slowly brought back to life through careful atmospheric manipulation and bioseeding. He had spent 5 years nurturing that world like a garden, watching it bloom under alien suns. Then corporate politics and rushed timelines had led to a cascading ecosystem failure that left the planet barren once again. Joran had watched his garden world die, taking with it his faith in grand gestures and ambitious dreams. Now he fixed things, small things, ventilation systems and water recyclers, and the 1,000 minor components. That kept a space station running. It was honest work, necessary work, and it asked nothing of him but steady hands and attention to detail. The solitude of the night shift was a balm to his soul, a chance to exist without the weight of others' expectations or his own past failures. It was during one of these quiet night shifts, 3 weeks after the mysterious woman's arrival, that Joran first encountered her. He was working on a faulty atmospheric processor in Section C, the residential area where the crew quarters were located. The unit had developed an annoying vibration that disrupted sleep cycles, and Joran had volunteered to fix it during the night hours when the disturbance would be minimal. He was elbow deep in the machinery, humming an old ballad about mountain mornings when he became aware of someone watching him. Joran looked up to find the woman, Kira. The crew called her, standing in the corridor about 10 feet away. She wore the simple gray jumpsuit that all station residents were issued, but somehow on her it looked elegant, otherworldly. Her silver-white hair caught the soft corridor lighting, and her violet eyes studied him with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Evening," Joran said quietly, not wanting to startle her. He had heard about her silence, her withdrawal from all attempts at communication. "Sorry about the noise. I'll have this fixed in a few minutes." Kira didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. She simply stood there, watching him work with the same patient attention she gave to the stars outside her window. Joran found her presence oddly comforting rather than intrusive. There was something about her stillness that reminded him of the deep forests of his childhood, a sense of ancient peace that made no demands and offered no judgments. He returned to his work, continuing to hum softly as he realigned the processor's components. The melody was one his grandmother had sung while tending her garden, a song about seeds planted in dark earth and the faith required to wait for spring. He didn't notice when Kira moved closer, her bare feet silent on the metal decking. When he finally emerged from the machinery, wiping his hands on a maintenance cloth, he found her sitting on the floor nearby, her back against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest. She was still watching him, but now there was something different in her expression, a flicker of something that might have been curiosity or perhaps recognition. "All fixed," Joran said, powering up the unit. The annoying vibration was gone, replaced by the smooth whisper of properly functioning air circulation. "Should be quiet now." Kira tilted her head slightly, and for a moment Joran thought she might speak, but she simply nodded once, the first direct acknowledgement she had given to anyone since her arrival. The next night, Joran was working on a water recycling unit in the same section when he found her again. This time she was sitting in the small observation lounge at the end of the corridor, staring out at the stars through the reinforced viewport. She glanced up when he passed with his toolkit, and something in her expression made him pause. "Mind if I work here?" he asked, gesturing to the environmental controls mounted near the window. "I promised to be quiet." She didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. Joran settled into his work, replacing worn components in the climate control system while she watched the stars. The silence between them was comfortable, unhurried. He found himself humming again, this time a lullaby his mother had sung when storms rattled their mountain cabin. As he worked, Joran became aware of a subtle change in the air around them. The recycled atmosphere of the station always carried a faint metallic tang, but now there was something else, a scent like ozone after rain, or the way the air smelled just before dawn in a forest glade. He glanced at Kira and found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. This became their routine. Each night, Joran would find maintenance tasks in Section C, and Kira would appear, drawn perhaps by the sound of his humming, or simply the presence of someone who made no demands on her silence. She never spoke, never made any overt gesture of communication, but gradually she began to respond to his presence in small ways. One night, while he was calibrating the atmospheric sensors, she moved from her usual spot by the window to sit on the floor nearby, close enough that he could see the strange, shimmering markings on her skin. Another night, she brought him a cup of Rose's lavender tea, setting it carefully beside his toolkit before retreating to her corner. Joran began to look forward to these encounters with an eagerness that surprised him. There was something about Kira's silent presence that soothed the restless ache he had carried since Kepler 442. She asked nothing of him, expected nothing, and in that freedom from expectation, he found a peace he hadn't known he was seeking. He started choosing his tasks more carefully, selecting repairs that would take him to the sections where she was most likely to appear. The other crew members noticed his increased efficiency in the residential areas, but they attributed it to his thorough nature rather than any personal motivation. It was during the fourth week of these quiet encounters that something changed. Joran was working on a stubborn ventilation grate, trying to free a seized bearing that had been causing the unit to run roughly. He was humming a particularly complex melody, a song about lost love and the hope of redemption, when he heard something that made him freeze. Another voice, so soft he almost thought he had imagined it, was humming along with him. He looked up to find Kira sitting nearby, her lips barely parted, the faintest whisper of melody emerging from her throat. Her eyes were closed, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked peaceful rather than guarded. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like wind chimes made of starlight, and it harmonized with his own humming in ways that made his chest tight with emotion. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Joran barely dared to breathe, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter whatever miracle was occurring. Kira's voice grew slightly stronger, more confident, weaving through the melody, with an instinctive understanding of harmony that spoke of a musical tradition far older and more sophisticated than anything human. When the song ended, the silence that followed was different from all the silences before. It was charged with possibility, heavy with the weight of a connection that had been forged in the space between one breath and the next. Kira opened her eyes and looked directly at him, and Joran saw something there that made his heart race. Not fear, not the distant politeness she showed the other crew members, but recognition, as if she had been waiting for him specifically. Though neither of them had known it until this moment, she didn't speak. That would come later, much later, but she smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of her lips, but it transformed her entire face. For the first time since her arrival, Kira looked not like a beautiful ghost haunting the station's corridors, but like a woman beginning to remember what it meant to be alive. Joran set down his tools and smiled back, feeling something shift in the careful walls he had built around his own heart. Whatever was happening between them, whatever connection was forming in these quiet night hours, he knew it was more important than any machine he had ever fixed, more precious than any world he had ever helped to terraform. In the gentle hum of the station's life support systems, in the soft glow of the corridor lights, in the vast silence of space that surrounded them, two wounded souls had found each other, and though neither spoke of it yet, both knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The hydroponics garden occupied the heart of Epsilon 7, a sprawling chamber where earth crops grew under artificial suns, and the air hummed with the green contentment of growing things. It was Rose's domain, carefully tended and lovingly maintained. But during the night cycle, it became something else entirely, a sanctuary of shadows and whispered growth, where the plants dreamed in the darkness. Joran had been called to repair a malfunctioning nutrient pump that had been causing irregular feeding cycles in the tomato beds. It was delicate work, requiring him to crawl between the growing racks with his smallest tools, careful not to disturb the sleeping plants. The air was thick with the scents of earth and chlorophyll, and water droplets from the misting system caught the emergency lighting like scattered diamonds. He had been working for nearly an hour when he heard the soft hiss of the entry door. Expecting Rosa, she sometimes checked on her plants during off hours. Joran continued his work, humming softly as he recalibrated the pump's pressure sensors. But when he emerged from beneath the growing racks, wiping condensation from his face, he found Kira standing among the pepper plants like a figure from a dream. She wore a flowing white sleep gown instead of her usual jumpsuit, and her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders. The emergency lighting cast her in shades of amber and shadow, making the markings on her skin seem to pulse with their own inner light. She was touching the leaves of a bell pepper plant with infinite gentleness, her violet eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Joran said softly, not wanting to startle her. Rosa says plants dream, you know. Different dreams than ours, but dreams all the same. Kira looked up at him, and for a moment he thought he saw tears glittering in her eyes. She moved to another plant, a climbing bean, that had wrapped itself around a support trellis and pressed her palm flat against its broad leaves. Her eyes closed, and the expression on her face was one of such profound longing that Joran felt his heart clench. Without thinking, he moved closer, drawn by an instinct he couldn't name. "Kira?" he said gently. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes and looked at him, and in that moment something shifted in the air between them. The scent of ozone he had noticed before grew stronger, and the fine hairs on Joran's arms stood up as if before an electrical storm. Kira's eyes widened in what looked like panic, and she took a step back. "It's okay," Joran said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Whatever's happening, it's okay. I'm not afraid." But Kira was afraid. He could see it in the tension of her shoulders, the way her breath came quick and shallow. She pressed herself back against the growing racks, shaking her head in small, frantic movements. The markings on her skin began to glow more brightly, pulsing in rhythm with her accelerated heartbeat. "Kira, please," Joran said, taking a careful step toward her. "You don't have to run. Not from me." She looked at him with such anguish that he nearly stepped back himself. But something in her expression, a desperate hope warring with terror, made him hold his ground. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand toward her, palm up, the same gesture he might use to approach a frightened animal. "I won't hurt you," he whispered. "I promise." For a long moment they stood frozen in tableau, Joran with his hand outstretched. Kira pressed against the growing racks, with her eyes fixed on his face. The air between them crackled with potential energy, and the plants around them seemed to lean inward as if drawn by some invisible force. Then, with a movement so quick he barely saw it, Kira reached out and touched his fingertips with her own. The world exploded. Joran's vision went white, then filled with images that weren't his own. He saw silver cities rising from purple seas under the light of twin suns. He felt the touch of minds linked in harmony, thousands of voices singing together in a chorus that transcended sound. He experienced the joy of a people who communicated, not just with words but with pure emotion, sharing love and laughter and dreams as easily as humans shared breath. And then came the darkness. He felt the first psychic screams as the scorching began, the weapon that turned thoughts into fire and love into agony. He experienced the terror of a linked species as their mental bonds became conduits for destruction, carrying death from mind to mind like a plague of flame. He felt Kira's desperate flight as her world burned around her, felt her last glimpse of her sister's face before the evacuation pod sealed shut. But worst of all, he felt the silence that followed, the absolute, devastating silence of a mind that had once been part of a vast symphony and now existed in isolation so complete it was like being buried alive. He felt her 3 years of wandering through space, drifting between dead worlds, the only living Nethri in a galaxy that had forgotten her people ever existed. The connection lasted only seconds, but it felt like lifetimes when it broke. Joran staggered backward, gasping as if he had been drowning. Kira collapsed to her knees among the pepper plants, her whole body shaking with the effort of containing powers that had been dormant for so long. "Oh God," Joran whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Kira, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." She looked up at him with eyes full of fear and shame, clearly expecting him to recoil, to run, to react with the same mixture of fascination and horror that had driven her to build walls around her mind. But Joran did none of those things. Instead, he knelt beside her among the growing plants and very gently took her hands in his. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Do you understand? You're not alone." The tears that had threatened earlier finally spilled over, tracking silver paths down her cheeks. She tried to pull away, but Joran held her hands gently, his brown eyes steady and calm. "I felt it," he continued. "The connection your people had. It was beautiful, Kira. Beautiful and terrible and more than any human could imagine. But you don't have to carry that silence by yourself anymore." She stared at him in wonder, as if he were speaking an impossible language. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words she couldn't quite voice. Can you hear me? Joran asked softly, not with your ears, but the other way. Kira's eyes widened, and very carefully, very tentatively, she nodded. The connection reformed between them, but gentler this time. Controlled. Instead of the overwhelming flood of memories, Joran felt a whisper of thought. Fragile as spun glass, you saw everything. Why aren't you afraid? The voice in his mind was like music, like water flowing over stones, like the first warm breeze of spring. It carried undertones of sorrow and hope and a desperate need to be understood. Because, Joran thought back, amazed at how natural the mental communication felt. You've been carrying this alone for too long. And because I think I've been waiting for you without knowing it. The confession surprised him even as he thought it, but he knew it was true. The restless ache he had carried since Kepler 442, the sense of something missing from his life. It hadn't just been about his failed project or his need for solitude. It had been about waiting for someone who could understand the particular shape of his loneliness. I don't know how to be close to someone. Kira's mental voice was barely a whisper. My people. We shared everything, every thought, every feeling. But now I'm afraid I'll hurt you. The power, when it comes back, it's not always gentle. Then we'll learn together, Joran replied, squeezing her hands gently. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be anything other than yourself. For the first time since her arrival on the station, Kira smiled without reservation. It transformed her face completely, making her look younger, more alive. The markings on her skin pulsed with warm light, and around them the plants seemed to straighten and reach toward that glow as if drawn by its life-giving energy. What are you? She asked, wonder coloring her mental voice. I can feel your thoughts so clearly, but humans aren't supposed to be telepathic. I don't know, Joran admitted. Maybe some humans are more sensitive than others. Maybe you've awakened something in me. Does it matter? She considered this, tilting her head in that characteristic gesture he had come to love. No, she decided, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here. They sat together in the hydroponics garden as the night cycle deepened around them, hands clasped and minds touching in ways that neither fully understood. The plants grew quietly in their beds, and the air hummed with contentment both botanical and deeply human. Tell me about your world. Joran thought to her, the way it was before. I want to understand. And so Kira began to share her memories, not the painful ones from the end, but the beautiful ones from before. She showed him the floating gardens of her home world, where Netheri children learned to tend both plants and minds with equal care. She shared the memory of her sister's laughter, bright as silver bells in a morning breeze. She let him experience the joy of the harvest festival, when her entire people would link minds and sing the crops to ripeness with pure emotion. In return, Joran shared his own memories, summer evenings in the Appalachian Mountains, the satisfaction of watching a dead world bloom under careful cultivation, the simple pleasure of fixing something broken and making it work again. He showed her the loneliness he had carried, but also the hope that had sustained him through the darkest times.